This program is brought to you by Yingling. Let's try it. So, tonight I'm doing like a little side series. And as you can see by the title on your screen, we're going to call it All In. No, we're not talking about a porn title. No, we're not talking about card games. We're talking about music. So, the concept here is I listen to every single studio album of a band back to back to back to back, and I give my thoughts on it. So, this is going to be strictly all studio albums. We're not going to do any live albums. If I do put any live tracks in, it'll be previously unreleased. Same goes for acoustic, but I could add some B-sides in there as well. Maybe even cover albums can count. So, tonight we're going to talk about these guys. That's right, Kiss. So, they have a total of 20 studio albums, spanning from their 1974 self-titled debut all the way up to 2012 when they put out the album Monster. So, I guess we'll start off with the self-titled, of course. Of course, you got Black Diamond, 100,000 Years, Cold Gin, Deuce. And then, the same year in 74, they also release... Oh, what was that second album? They also released Hotter Than Hell. So, here you got, of course, the title track. You got Let Me Go Rock and Roll, Watching You, Strange Ways. I don't think there was any, like, real big hits off of that one. And then, shortly thereafter, 1975, comes Dressed to Kill. So, here we have Rock and Roll All Night, of course, arguably their biggest song, and probably their most overplayed song, I'd have to say. And then they do Kiss Alive, the first Kiss Alive after the first three albums, which was a big hit. I mean, the live album was arguably more popular than the first three studio albums. I mean, that's what they were known for. But, moving on, we have Destroyer, which was very popular. Came out in 76, and this is the only album from the 70s I got on physical media. Everything else pretty much on download. But here we got the popular hit, Shout It Out Loud. We got Detroit Rock City, two popular songs off that album. God of Thunder is another good one. And another one I liked that wasn't really a hit was King of the Nighttime World. That's a pretty good song. And then we roll on to 77. We stay in 76. Rock and Roll Over. I forgot about that. So here we have Calling Dr. Love and Mr. Speed. I like that song even though it's not really that popular. I Want You, Hard Luck Woman. But, so far in the discography, I like most of the 70s Kiss. Like, I could listen to those albums over and over. And then, coming up in 77, we move on to Love Gun. So, we have Shock Me. We have Plaster Caster. Obviously, the title track, Love Gun, which is real popular. Christine 16. I Stole Your Love, which I remember... The first time I heard I Stole Your Love was actually on the movie Detroit Rock City, whenever that religious mom found the Kiss album hidden in the Carpenter's case, and it started off with that song. I always associate that scene of Detroit Rock City there at the beginning with that song. So then we move on to Dynasty. Well, actually, they did Kiss Alive 2 right after that, and they did do like 5 studio tracks that are exclusive to that album. But then we move on to Dynasty, which here I feel like Kiss should have sort of took a little bit of a turn as far as their sound goes. Like, as you may know, like the 70s was kind of like infested with disco, and Kiss sort of tried to fit in with the time with that, which I mean, most of the time it did work and it was different, but I still liked the album. And popular hit on this one was I Was Made for Loving You, which was a very disco-like song, but I liked it. But here we have 2000 Men, which I believe was a Stones cover. And then, like, Save Your Love, Magic Touch, which, you know, they weren't really singles, but I liked them. But this is where Peter Criss was sort of starting to leave the band. And so then we move on to 1980, and then they ended up releasing Unmasked. And there wasn't... It's... From what I'm hearing, this album really didn't take off too well. I mean, they had a couple of good songs on it, but I didn't care for it. I do like Two Sides of the Coin, which, first time I heard that song, it's on one of the greatest hits compilations, so that's how I heard that one. But there wasn't really anything super popular off that album, at least years later. I guess apparently Shandy was kind of popular. It was sort of like a ballad, which, going back to the 70s, you know, you also had Beth, which was a ballad. I would say, like, power ballads could have started there when you think about it. But yeah, Unmasked, meh. So then we move on to Music from the Elder, and they took a more instrumental take on things by this point. Like the first 4 or 5 tracks, it almost had like an element of classical to it, which when I first heard it, I didn't care for it, but I mean, I don't mind it. And then by about the last 4 songs, it started to really rock. Like, you get to the song The Oath and the song I like them 2 songs. So, but I mean, as far as the whole album goes, again, meh. I would say, like, the last half of the album redeemed it. So then, we'll move on to, when was it? 1982. We move on to Creatures of the Night, which I feel like in this album, they sort of bounced back since the 70s. Like, you start off with the title track, obviously, Creatures of the Night. Good tune. You also got Killer. Of course, no 80s Kiss album is complete without a ballad. You got I Still Love You. Then you got War Machine, which, last track on the album, very underrated. Love it. And then, of course, the big hit from that album, I Love It Loud. So, yeah, Creatures of the Night, love that album. And then we move on to 1983, where they removed the makeup. And, of course, I was being born in 1980. I don't remember when this actually happened, but, of course, you know, studying my history, it was apparently a big deal. And, of course, this is in the time when MTV was fairly new, but taking off. And so, kids could show themselves without makeup. I mean, apparently it was a really big deal, but coming from that, you have the album Lick It Up from 1983, and on the cover you can see they have no makeup. But moving on here, we got their title track, Lick It Up. It's a real popular song. But I do like the song, what was it? On the 8th Day. Like, it wasn't a single, but I thought it rocked. Like, the whole album, I feel like Creatures and Lick It Up, you know, you could have almost put them together. Like, and then you segue into Animalize. Of course, you have the song Burn, Bitch, Burn. Yeah, Kiss never really swore until the 80s. And then you got the big popular hit, Heaven's on Fire, on that album. Love that song. I think Heaven's on Fire would be the first Kiss song I could remember hearing. Like, I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, I would say. My dad had a tape with some Guns N' Roses songs on it. It was like a blank tape with, like, it was sort of a mixtape, if you will. And I'm pretty sure that, I think Heaven's on Fire was on that tape as well, along with, like, Paradise City and Welcome to the Jungle. So, kind of a sign of the times there. But then you got, like, Thrills of the Night, Under the Gun, Lonely as a Hunter, like, Animalize, another good album. And then we segue, that was 84. We go to 85, another album. So we got Asylum for 85. So here the popular track would be Tears Are Falling. And then All Night. Like they were kind of in the 80s, kind of like the 80s hair band era at this point, but they were still like rocking. So then we move on to 87, and if you watch Vlogs That Rock with me and GMC, we kind of determined that 87 was like the peak year for hair bands, and that's where hair bands kind of got like a lot more poppy, popular than normal. Like, in that time you had like Whitesnake peaking their popularity. I could almost compare their album Crazy Nights from 87 to Whitesnake. And even Def Leppard, too. Like, Def Leppard got real poppy right around that year. So, here we have a song called Bang Bang You. Yeah, whatever that means. Crazy Crazy Nights, the title track, obviously. I love Hell or High Water. That's a good song. You got No No No. And then they did a couple of exclusive tracks to their greatest hits compilation. It was called Smashes, Trashes, and Hits. Let's Put the X in Sex, which I don't really remember that one coming out, honestly. But now we move on to Hot in the Shade. Now, I do vaguely remember when Forever was like a hit. Like, of course, again, the ballad, you had to have that in the 80s. Like, it wasn't just all over the rock stations. I mean, it was on your top 40 stations too back then. But this would be like their longest album, like 15 tracks. I would say it was right around an hour long. And here you got Silver Spoon, Rise to It, Hide Your Heart, King of Hearts, Little Caesar. This would have been damn near a double album by 70s standards, I would say. But we'll move on. So we leave the 80s, we enter the 90s. And so this is the only other one I have on physical. Revenge. Love this album. Very heavy, very gritty. And this has a few singles to it. It has Domino. Is that one song? It has that one lyric I like. It's like, once that bitch bends over, I forget my name. I thought that was always funny. And then, of course, there's a ballad, Every Time I Look at You. Still gotta have the ballad. You have the song Unholy, which is very hard, very, very metal. And then, yeah, Thou Shall Not. God Gave Rock and Roll to You. That's a big hit that they still played at their shows up until recently. Which, by the way, they did their final show, was it like last year sometime? And finally called it quits. And then we move on. Of course, they do Kiss Alive 3. Going to the Kiss Alive series. And then they also do an MTV Unplugged, like many bands were doing in the 90s, like Nirvana did it, Alice in Chains did it, now we have Kiss that did it. And then we move on to kind of a weird album called Carnival of Souls. Now, I'd never heard this album at all until recently, and I feel like they were trying to fit in with like the Pearl Jams and Nirvanas of the time, but I don't know, the album, I kind of feel like it slumped a little bit. I mean, the one song I do like from it was Jungle, but other than that, they could have just, like, shelved it and not released it. Very next year, they get the reunion. All four members reunite, and then 1998, we get Psycho Circus. And my thoughts on that album, I remember I was in high school. Me and GMC were in high school, and he bought the album. And I feel like they kind of came back to their original form on that one. Of course, you got the title track, Psycho Circus. You got Into the Void. And they kind of did a song sort of theming around their intro at the concerts. Like, you wanted the best! You got the song's actually called You Wanted the Best. And that's kind of what the song is about. So, and then you move on to the movie Detroit Rock City, like I mentioned earlier, with Love Gun. They did a little ballad called Nothing Can Keep Me From You, which it's strictly an original song to that soundtrack. That's really the only studio song that I put in there that wasn't like a Kiss album. But that came out in 99, along with the movie, obviously. So then you move on to like 2003, I believe it is. They do Kiss Symphony, which they're kind of taking a step from Metallica on that one. When Metallica did S&M. This is kind of similar. And yeah, it worked. It wasn't bad. They called it I guess that was considered the Kiss Alive 4 album. So then, we move on all the way to 2009. They took an 11-year break from studio albums. So there was an 11-year gap between Psycho Circus and what we're going to talk about now, Sonic Boom. And so, what we got here is Modern Day Delia. Definitely a good song. I would say probably their most popular song of that album. But, all in all, I mean, that album was actually pretty good. I would say probably like 2/3 of the songs on that album were good. And then we move on 3 years later to 2012, where they recorded Monster. And I do like Hallelujah, but everything else on it was kind of meh. So, but all in all, the albums were pretty good. And I didn't start really getting into Kiss until maybe later high school. And I kind of started listening with this album, with Double Platinum. That's kind of where I started to really listen to Kiss. You know, kind of, it has like all the basic good tracks from the 70s, but I later come to find out that, you know, a lot of these are like remixes rather than it being a greatest hits. And of course I have this compilation and this compilation. And then in 2000, I saw them during their farewell tour in Hershey. They had Ted Nugent opening up for them, and I bought this book at the souvenir trailer, and this literally lists like every concert they did from like 1973 all the way to like early 2000. Like if you flip through here, it tells you every single stop, including the non-makeup era. And of course, there's another set of pages here telling you every album up until that point. Yeah, like, check that out. Oh, damn, it's falling apart. And then, of course, they're promoting their website, that this site clicks ass. But yeah, that was my review and thoughts about every Kiss album ever. Back to back to back to back. So as far as my favorites and least favorites of Kiss, I'm going to split this off in eras. So 70s era Kiss, I would say Destroyer is my favorite in that era. My least favorite in that era, I don't think I really have a least favorite in the 70s. Now, 80s era Kiss, least favorite would have to be Unmasked. Most favorite album of the 80s, definitely Creatures of the Night. But I would say like the next three afterwards, like if you take Creatures of the Night, Lick It Up, Animalize, and Asylum, I could take and play all four of that album. I could play all four of those albums back to back to back and repeat them. So like all three of those behind are like close. So moving on to 90s era Kiss, definitely Revenge. Yeah, Revenge would be at the top. Psycho Circus a close second. And then, of course, Carnival of Souls. I didn't care for that one too much. And then you go into like the 2000s era of Kiss. We'll just say 2000s and beyond. You know, Sonic Boom was good. Monster was okay, but my least favorite. So that's kind of how I rank them as far as like their albums and their eras. But I mean, all in all, they had a damn good career. They spanned about 40 years in albums, 50 years in live shows, and now they're doing this Avatar thing, which I'm not really too sure on that or how that's going to last. And of course, what is it, like 3 days after the 50th anniversary of the first Kiss album, Ace releases his 10,000 Volts solo album, and I even thought that was pretty good. So yeah, I did not include the solo albums in this review. I did strictly Kiss albums. So yeah, there'll be more of these to come for the All In series. I'm working on one right now, and I'll definitely do a video on that here in the near future. We'll see you later.